explode in terms of economic prosperity. That lasted until the world financial crisis happened, and of course those shocks affected the whole world. If you remember, oil fell to about $38 a barrel, and all commodities, cocoa, gold, everything, dropped in value. And because Africa is a major exporter of raw commodities to the world, Africa took a shock, and things unraveled. Global shocks will always occur, and what you need to do as an African economy is to make sure that you build the resilience to be able to go through the shock with minimal damage. And so COVID affected everybody, but the economies that are more resilient are recovering very quickly, and sometimes if you look at the growth in sectors, they are even faster than pre-COVID. My country took a major hit from COVID, and that's because we had no buffers, we had overborrowed, and so we had a debt crisis, that was exposed by COVID. And so after COVID, it's like the pack of cards just crumbled, and we had to crawl on our knees to the IMF, for a bailout, which is currently being disbursed, but definitely the country still has potential. And with prudent management of the economy, we should be able to bring that country back on its feet. We need to cut expenditure. There is a certain temptation to give everything free, and so there's a competition on who can give the freest things. But you must have the wherewithal to be able to give things free, and so if just for political capital you want to make everything free, everybody should have things free, when you don't have the capacity to be able to manage it, then it becomes a problem. I do think that we should have social safety nets that protect the poor and vulnerable. And my party is a social democratic party, so we believe that the fruits of growth should be shared equitably amongst all classes of society. But then, while you finance those social safety nets, you must make sure that you are raising the revenue to be able to make them effective. It doesn't make sense to roll out social interventions and not be able to fund it properly, and it doesn't give you the maximum effect and quality that you expect it to do. And so managing our economics prudently, cutting out waste. There's a lot of waste, in the system. In Ghana, and because I come from Ghana, I normally use Ghana as an example. If you take the Auditor General's report every year, and you see how much money is misappropriated through procurement and all that kind of thing, we wouldn't need to go to the IMF if we're able to plug those holes. 17 billion cedis, it's either not accounted for properly. And then you're going to the IMF for 3 billion over 3 years, 1 billion a year. And 1 billion is equivalent to about 11 billion cedis. And so it means you're wasting more than you're going to the IMF to beg for. And so prudent management of expenditure and cutting out waste, I think it's a way that African economies can make themselves more resilient. And also creating the buffers that make sure that when external shocks occur, you're able to survive, which is what my government sought to do through self-sacrifice. We put money in the stabilization fund, and it became, very handy when COVID hit. Because when COVID hit, the government had no resources anywhere to begin the process of ameliorating the pandemic. And luckily, there was this stash of funds that was in the stabilization fund. And so we said, go look in there, ask for Parliament. The procedure is that you request it from Parliament, and Parliament will give the approval to use it. And so it was used to start the fight against COVID. We set up the sinking fund, which was a fund where we put aside some monies anytime we went on the international capital market. We also put part of our oil revenues into that fund so that we were not surprised by any debt that became due for payment. And so as debts became due for payment, we used the sinking fund to amortize them. We set up the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, into which we put seed money of $270 million. So that it could be the start of a sovereign wealth fund. Incidentally, most Ghanaians don't know it, but the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund that we set up financed 15% of the new airport terminal that we built, Terminal 3. And so that's one of the first legacy infrastructure projects that it invested in. And it was going to grow because some of the oil revenue was going to be put there and other sources of funding were going to go into that fund, so that then we could use it to leverage investment to fix our roads. And when we fix the roads, we could toll the roads so that they are self-paying. Anybody who passes pays a toll, and it helps to pay back the investment that the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund would have made. You toll the bridges, you build the bridges and toll them. And so those are some of the things that African countries can do in order to improve the condition, the environment in which investment takes place. We also must prioritize. I mean, if you don't have the money, you don't go and buy a private jet for the use of the president. And so you must put your money where your mouth is and make sure that every single dollar that we're spending as African countries is going into things that will directly benefit the people and directly enhance the prosperity of our nation. And so that's important. Then entrepreneurship, and that's what I spoke about at the Black Business Initiative yesterday. It is clearly the way to go. We need to encourage our young people that you can become an employer and not an employee. But then first we need to give them the skills to become entrepreneurs. And so entrepreneurship should become a part of our curricula, where we start to teach the children from an early age how to run and own businesses. Because if you take my country, Ghana, for instance, the number of people employed in the public sector is less than 700,000 people. And we have a population of 29 million. And so only 700,000 is in the public sector. If you take the whole formal sector, so that includes public and private sector, the whole formal sector, less than 20% of the population is employed in the formal sector. 80% is employed in the informal sector. And so it means that, and at the same time, you have almost 150,000 graduates coming out of university every year. And so how are you going to employ all these people? Employment is 13% at the moment. But amongst young people who have finished school, unemployment is at about 13%. But amongst young people who have finished school, unemployment is currently above 25%. There are people who finished school 4 years ago and cannot find a job. They are sitting at home, staying with their parents, being fed by their parents. And so when we talk about the youth bulge and we say it is favorable to Africa and that we have a young, vibrant labor force, yes, that's good. But if to have a young, vibrant labor force, you must be creating opportunities to use that labor force. Unfortunately, our economies are not growing as fast as they should to create opportunities for these young people to be able to find jobs in the world of work. And then that becomes a time bomb. It's no longer, the advantage that you thought it would be. It becomes a ticking time bomb. Because as these young people find a lack of opportunities, and that's what happened in North Africa, in Tunisia, when the young man Bouazizi set himself on fire and killed himself. And that led to a series of things that created the whole Arab Spring, that we call it, and changed the architecture of political leadership in North Africa, permanently. In sub-Saharan Africa, we're beginning to see it in the form of coup d'etats, because when the coups happen, who are those who jump on the streets and celebrate the removal of the previous government? It's the young people. You see them on the streets dancing and happy, But there's no evidence that military governments do better than civilian governments. But, the point is, in democracy, you say they are participants in the democracy, and so every 4 years you ask them to come and vote. And so every 4 years they go and vote. They queue to vote. And if you go and talk to many of the young people in my country and in other African countries, they say they don't see the reason why they should even vote, because it's a waste of time, because they don't see any improvement in the quality of their lives. And so initially when soldiers take over, they believe that, we need some discipline, we need some authoritarianism. But when you get stuck with a bad military government, it's the worst thing you can ever have, because you can't talk, you will be thrown into prison, you'll be beaten, you'll be killed. You know, at least you can exact accountability from civilian government. And so you can talk and, you know that a constitution will protect your human rights. And if things don't change, you have the opportunity after 4 years or 5 years, depending on what the tenure is for governments in your country, to be able to vote that administration out. And so some of the frustration of young people is beginning to show in their support for coup d'etats in Africa and the coup d'etats themselves, because they exploit the frustration of the population to take over. And the other part of the frustration is being shown in their migrating out of Africa. And so first it was the unskilled crossing the Sahara and so on and so forth. But now a lot of the professionals, highly skilled, are looking for greener pastures elsewhere and leaving, and especially the post-COVID. COVID took a toll on our economies, and so most of the economies are now trying to climb out of COVID, and it is creating quite, strong pressures on the middle class and the professionals, and so many of them are beginning to leave. And so entrepreneurship, definitely, because the public sector cannot employ everybody that needs a job. The private sector should absorb the rest, but it's not growing fast enough. And so we need to see how to grow the private sector faster. It's not enough to say that the private sector is the engine of growth. Yes, it's the engine of growth, but it needs a steer, it needs ties, it needs, other things to be able to move, the economy forward. And so that's an area that we need to look at. There was a program that we did in my country, and I think that those are some of the drawbacks of democracy. After I lost the election, the government that came in just chucked it and came up with another program of their own. But this was the Youth Entrepreneurship Support Initiative, and we gave seed money of 10 million. And we advertised it widely. It was not political. Any young person who had a business idea could apply. And so there were about more than 6,000 applications. And what we did was we got, leading business people to go through the applications and guide them to draw up feasibility studies. And so they submitted the feasibility studies. And for the first cohort, we selected a little over 600 of them and invested in their businesses. And several of them were successful, others too, were not so successful. But I can talk of one of them that is still working. It's a young lady. She got the funding. Today she exports shea butter products and other products to UK, US, EU, and all other places. And she's exporting, her volumes are about 6,000, 12.5 kilos of shea butter products every quarter, and she's employed directly more than 100 people, and indirectly all the women who sell the shea butter to her are also earning an income, from it. And she's just one person. There are several others whose businesses were successful. And so these are models that we can use. Finally, African Continental Free Trade Area. It creates unimaginable opportunities for Africa. Currently, the trade amongst ourselves is 15%. It's the lowest in the world. In Europe, the trade amongst European countries is 60%. And so you can make a comparison. And so the African Continental Free Trade Area is meant to open up so that goods and services can move between countries. And I'm proud to say that it's